Welcome to Learners Academy. This is Mona Bhatia and today I'm taking second chapter of MMR BA and the chapter's name is Steps in Research Process. As we have discussed in the last chapter also, research is a process that involves various steps. We have to follow step-by-step procedure to conduct any research, and you have to follow a sequence. Remember, you always have to follow a sequence. Sometimes steps may overlap. Nevertheless, you have to still follow the sequence. A researcher basically has a choice to choose from variety of methods and procedure in order to achieve his objective. A researcher may also have to reevaluate and revise again and again. So it is necessary to have an initial research plan. New material needs to be added from time to time. Deletions of unnecessary and irrelevant material should also be done from time to time, and sometimes during the process of research something new is discovered which catches your attention, which catches your fancy, and then you may have to change the research topic altogether. Nothing wrong in that. Basically, this could be additional research topic which you may would like to take up later. Sometimes what happens, the research topic is very narrow and you don't get the proper material. Sometimes what you learn may not support the thesis with which you began. So as I said, any which ways, the research process involves identifying, locating, assessing, analyzing, and then developing and expressing your ideas. So research process requires patience, a lot of patience, and you have to check all the resources pertaining to your topic. This will consume a lot of your time and energy, but be prepared for that. It is more of a art than science. Nevertheless, you have to take it in a scientific manner. You have to take certain steps like in a scientific process that will be discussed in this chapter. The first step in the research process is identifying a problem. The first step is to identify the problem or develop a research question. Basically, there should be thorough understanding of the research problem. The researcher needs to examine the literature available in order to familiarize with the problem that is being studied. He needs to rephrase the problem, and then this will help him to understand the relevant and irrelevant data. Okay, the second step is to review the literature. Now, after identifying the problem, the researcher must learn more and more about the same problem. So he needs to survey the literature connected to the problem extensively, like journals, books, government records, and all these things will provide him fundamental knowledge about the problem. This will help him in the research. It also educates the researcher about what studies have been conducted in the past regarding this question, how these studies have been conducted in the past, then what conclusions were made out of these studies. So some new information will also surface in the course of research. Now, by doing these, the researcher understands the magnitude of the problem. He can understand the future consequences also. So there are two things that he will understand: review the concepts and theory and review the previous research finding. I'm going to write it for you. Review the concepts and theories, and the second is review the previous research finding. Now moving on to the third step. It is about formulating, how to formulate hypotheses. So once the literature has been examined by the researcher, he has to state very clearly the hypothesis, which is tentative assumption to draw out and test the logical consequences. The way in which the research hypothesis is developed provides the focal point of the research. Now the hypothesis has to be specific and limited to research being undertaken. So it has to be tested, because you should not go haywire. Hypothesis limits your area, limits the area of study of research, and keeps the researcher on the right track always. Hypothesis will not, encourage the researcher to just cross the boundaries. So, but for that, researchers should discuss with experts about the research, its origin, objective, and examining available records and data and reviews of similar studies also. So the researcher must clarify the problem and narrow down the scope of study. And this is done after the literature is reviewed properly. Alright, one more thing to minimize the confusion about terms and phrases, as they have different definition depending upon who is reading, then the researcher must define them for the study. This makes the concept more understandable to the reader. Researcher must also define the population on which the research is done, and he should make a roadmap of the entire study, specifying who will participate in the study, how and when the data will be collected, and also the content of the program. After this is done, we move on to the fourth step, and that is design research. Alright, so in this step, the researcher will make a framework within which the research will be carried out. And this helps the researcher to be efficient and to get the maximum information. It actually saves his time, his effort, his money. A suitable research design, if he makes, it has minimum biases and it has maximum reliability of the data. So research design by the researcher also depends on how much time he has and how much finances he can use for this research program, and the means by which the information will be collected, and also what are the skill set of the researcher, most important. Alright, so accordingly the researcher will make a roadmap. As I told you, he will specify who will participate in the study, how and when the data will be collected, and how the content of the program, and who will collect the data, and how the data will be analyzed. So this is also called instrumentation plan, and it specifies all the steps that must be completed for the study. Now after this, the major step is collection of data. So this is one of the main steps. Alright, the actual study begins with the collection of data, as it provides crucial information needed to answer the research question. So data which is to be collected can be collected by various methods like questionnaire, or by observation, or from literature, or through interviews. And researcher actually collects data at first step and at last step also, so as to have two sets of data. Then researcher has to analyze these two sets of data before and after the program is run. So collection of data involves various methods which differ in terms of time, in terms of cost, in terms of efforts, and in terms of resources. So once this is done, we'll move on to the next important step, that is analysis of the data. Now the researcher has the data, because he's collected, which needs to be analyzed so that the research question is answered. He has to avoid personal prejudices and biases while analyzing, and keep the research analysis realistic. Very, very important point. He has to keep the research analysis realistic. The result of the analysis has to be reviewed and then it has to be summarized. After this is done, all these things like conducting studies, using these steps in the research process, all these things, they require dedication. All these things require a lot of time, effort, planning. So there is no point in conducting the research in a very hush-hush manner, because it will result in wrong conclusion, right? And they are of no value to anybody. Time and efforts will be wasted, not only of the researchers but others also. So you should be very true to your research. So data analysis will require many procedures, like establishing categories, then applying categories to raw data, then tabulation, then drawing conclusion, etc. Now, and researcher may also have to discard the irrelevant data during this step. When he's analyzing, uh, he will come across all those irrelevant data that he has collected. So at this step, he will discard those data which is of no use. Now, next step after this analysis of data is the testing of the hypothesis. Now, after the data has been analyzed, now the researcher can test the hypothesis which was formulated earlier. He can check and find out if the facts support the hypothesis or they are contrary to it. Okay. Now, various tests have been developed by statistician for this purpose. That is to check whether the hypothesis stands correct or it stands null. And these are chi-square test, t-test, f-test. So testing of hypothesis will lead to either you accept the hypothesis or you reject it. Alright. So if any hypothesis is tested and confirmed many a time, then the researcher builds a theory and makes interpretation and generalization on the basis of data that is analyzed, right? So these interpretation may lead to further questions which can be taken up by the oncoming researcher, all right? So you have to have that questioning mindset, because whatever theories have been established, you have to cross question them. All right. Now the next step is the preparation of research report. Now the researcher makes a report of whatever is done by him. He has to be very, very, very clear. The preliminary pages of the report will contain title, date, acknowledgement, forwards, table of contents, and then the main text will be there. All right. So the main text will have the introduction, summary of the findings, main report, and conclusion. All right. So at the end of the report, the researcher will have to list down the appendices, then bibliography. All right. So these are the steps of a good, research, whatever steps in the research process. Now, so I will tell you what is the criteria of a good research. It should include clear statement of purpose. It should have a proper research design. It should be valid and it should have a reliable data. That's very important and foremost quality. And then systematic data analysis should be there. Justifiable conclusion also should be there in a good research. So a good research is basically a systematic thing, and it has to be very, very logical. Each researcher has to refer to the previous works in the area by other researchers. So he has to give credit to other researcher or those people who have done some work in the same field. So researcher must give credits to the work of others when writing an academic paper. That's all. So I'm going to give you a set of questionnaire. Please prepare for that.